Welcome to Whispered Clues tonight. Sherlock Holmes faces the footsteps that led nowhere. Footprints appear, then fade into silence. Where do you think they lead? Now pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The faint tap-tap-tap against the window pane came before dawn, steady as if measured by a metronome. I had been at my desk finishing my notes on a recent, quite ordinary burglary when Holmes's voice drifted from the darkness behind me. "You hear it, Watson?" Rhythm without purpose, a human signal disguised as persistence. I turned, and he was already upright in his chair, his silhouette sharp against the grey wash of the unlit street. A messenger? I ventured. Perhaps. Or perhaps a conscience. He crossed to the window, lifted the sash, and admitted both the chill air and a young constable whose boots squeaked like remorse on the floorboards. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, Doctor," the man stammered. "Inspector Lestrade's compliments. There's a matter down at Kensington Gardens, unusual footprints, or rather the lack of them." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Lack of footprints?" "Yes, sir. A body found near the Serpentine Walk. Fresh ground, damp with rain, but not a trace of approach or departure, as if the poor soul fell from the clouds." Holmes shut the window with a decisive click. "Watson, fetch your coat. The dawn promises paradox." As we rattled through the empty streets, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the cab wheels echoed the earlier knocking, the first emergence of what I would later recognize as the motif of the case, a sound without a source. Holmes sat motionless beside me, fingertips pressed together. I could sense the thrill that always animated him when logic challenged fact. At Kensington Gardens, the constable led us to a cordoned clearing near the water. A man's body lay sprawled face down upon the path that crushed beside him, the gravel unbroken on every side. Even my untrained eye could see the impossibility. Holmes crouched and whispered, "No footprints, no drag marks, no wheel ruts." Yet he did not fall from above. The rain ceased an hour before the body was found. See the dry ring beneath his coat. Lestrade appeared from the shadows, rubbing his hands. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes. A puzzler for you, eh? The fellow's name's Mr. Adrian Murch, solicitor. No wounds, no struggle. We scoured for half a mile with nothing but clean gravel." Holmes's gaze flickered toward the water's edge. "You have his hat, Inspector?" Lestrade produced it. Holmes turned it over in his long fingers, then lifted it to his ear as though it might speak. "Notice, Watson, the inside band is damp, yet the brim is dry." Therefore he was standing in the rain, head uncovered, and replaced the hat after death. Curious indeed. Lestrade snorted. "Replaced it himself, did he?" "Hardly." Holmes straightened. Our invisible visitor had a sense of tidiness, a rare trait among murderers. I glanced uneasily around the empty lawns. "Then you think this was
deliberate, no accident? Every absence is an intention, my dear fellow." Holmes knelt again, fingers tracing faint impressions that I could scarcely see. "Observe, here 3 small depressions, triangular, faint as breath. Not footprints, but the mark of a tripod or stand. The murderer perhaps employed some device to mislead the eye. Precision mechanical, not supernatural." Lestrade frowned. "And what about motive? Robbery's out the man's purse, and watch untouched." "Motive is never the first key," Holmes murmured. "Method opens the door, motive merely locks it." He beckoned me closer. "You notice the right hand, Watson? The index finger is stained with black residue, or soot. Yet the man was no labourer, a writer perhaps." Holmes shook his head. "No callus from pen pressure. More likely he handled documents sealed with lampblack papers, maybe before he died." At that instant, a faint sound carried across the garden's tap-tap-tap, like the echo of our earlier signal. Lestrade turned sharply. "That again! We heard it when we arrived and thought it was the wind against the railing." Holmes's eyes narrowed. Direction. From the bandstand, we followed the sound through the mist to the ornate iron structure. The tapping ceased as we approached. Holmes stooped and retrieved a small wooden cane, its end wrapped with cloth. He struck it gently against the rail. Tap, tap, tap. The tone was identical. "A blind man's walking stick," I said. "Not quite." Holmes unscrewed the cap. Inside lay a narrow glass tube half filled with pale dust, chalk, the kind used by map surveyors. "And this cloth? Watson, see the stitching? It bears the monogram AM, our dead solicitor's initials." Lestrade grunted. "Then it's his." Holmes smiled faintly. "Indeed." "But how did it travel 20 yards from the body without marks between?" He raised the cane to his nose, inhaled. "There is the faintest scent of spirits industrial, not potable. The tube was opened recently, perhaps to pour something onto the ground. Our Mr. Murch may have been measuring, not walking, before his end." "Measuring what?" I asked. Holmes turned toward the Serpentine. The wind caught the surface, rippling silver under the weak sunrise. "Space, Watson, distance without footsteps. Therein lies our riddle." He tapped the cane against the gravel thrice, slowly, listening. The echo carried oddly strong to the left, muted to the right. "Note that, Inspector? Sound bouncing off something, maybe the hedge, or something beneath the gravel," Holmes said softly. "A hollow cavity, perhaps newly covered." Without hesitation, he seized Lestrade's spade from a constable and began to dig. After a few strokes, the spade struck metal with a dull, reverberant clang. Holmes knelt, brushing away grit to reveal a square iron plate inset flush with the path. "A maintenance hatch for the water mains," Lestrade muttered. "Precisely," said Holmes, "and through it a man might move unseen beneath the surface, emerging without footprints, provided he knew the locks."
Holmes replaced the plate gently, straightened his coat, and stared at the still form of Adrian Murch. "The absence of prints is the signature of presence. Whoever arranged this knew how to erase evidence at its source." He looked at me then, the light in his eyes sharpened to a blade. "Watson, we are dealing with someone who understands silence as a language." The sound motif returned, the faint tap-tap-tap, echoing from somewhere distant, faint but deliberate, like a pulse in the fog. "Holmes," I whispered. "It's still going." He smiled almost imperceptibly. "Yes, my dear fellow, and it is inviting us to listen." Holmes was already crouched beside the iron plate, his ear bent close to the gravel, as if listening to the earth itself breathe. The faint tap-tap-tap persisted, irregular now, somewhere below us like a secret heartbeat muffled in stone. "Someone moving beneath," he murmured. "The main passage connects through several maintenance tunnels. Few know their layout, fewer still could enter without keys." Lestrade scowled. "You mean the killer's down there?" Holmes raised a finger. "No, Inspector, he's already gone. What we hear is his echo of the consequence of what he set in motion." The sound faded, then returned faintly as though travelling away. Holmes stood abruptly. "We shall examine the hatch later. For now, the scene speaks more than the corpse." He walked a slow circle about the body, eyes scanning the untouched gravel. "Watson, your medical eye how? Long since death?" I knelt and touched the man's wrist. The skin was cool but not yet rigid. "Less than 2 hours, I judge." "Excellent." "Then he died near the time the rain ceased." Holmes's gaze shifted to the cane. A man struck down by silence just as the world grew still. Lestrade made a noise of impatience. "I'll have the body removed to the yard for examination." "There's little else to see?" "On the contrary," Holmes replied. He pointed toward a scrap of paper clinging to the cuff of the dead man's sleeve. "There is always something else." I plucked it free, a torn fragment of a letter, smeared with moisture, but legible enough the transfer cannot be delayed further. He must be warned before sunrise. Holmes read it twice, lips pressed thin. A warning that came too late or was never meant to arrive. He turned to Lestrade. Has Murch any known associates in law? Partner named Enoch Vale, quiet man, runs the firm since Murch took ill last winter. Ah, Holmes said softly, illness is the most convenient alibi known to man. The faint tap-tap-tap came again, this time behind us across the path. I spun, expecting another constable. Nothing, only the ripple of the Serpentine, dark and unbroken. Holmes smiled faintly. The sound persists, yet alters its direction. Curiously, Watson, water conducts echoes as faithfully as guilt conducts motive. Lestrade sighed. You'll forgive me if I leave you to your metaphors. I'll see the body conveyed to the yard. When he and his men withdrew, Holmes motioned me closer. Ziaita Kane? The letter? The absence of tracks all converge upon design. Mr. Murch died here by appointment, not chance. Tell me, what strikes you most unusual? The lack of struggle, I said. He met his killer willingly. Precisely, and such meetings seldom occur without correspondence. Therefore, we shall visit his office. But, first, Holmes knelt once more beside the iron hatch. We note the pattern. He brushed gravel from its surface, revealing faint chalk lines that radiated outward like compass points, drawn by Murch's own hand, likely using the chalk we found in his cane. He was marking measurements. The question is why here? Surveying, perhaps? Holmes tapped the hatch with the back of his hand. Tap, tap, tap. The note was dull but resonant. Mark the tone, Watson, hollow yet not empty. Something lies beneath besides air. I shivered. You believe something was hidden below, or someone? He said, straightening. Come, we require records and daylight. By 9 o'clock the city will be stirring, and with it the truth. The ride back to Baker Street was silent save for the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Holmes's eyes remained closed, his fingers moving in that peculiar steeple pattern of thought. At intervals he tapped the carriage wall, slightly measured beats, as though testing the motif itself. Inside our rooms he paced before the fire. Murch the solicitor, he mused aloud, known for property transfers and municipal contracts, a man dealing in boundary ownership of space. Then the measurements at the gardens might concern a boundary dispute. Excellent, Watson, though perhaps one not confined to the living. He turned sharply. Fetch my index. Murch, Adrian. I obeyed. Within minutes he had extracted a slim folder and scanned it. Here we are. Murch handled deeds for the Metropolitan Waterworks 2 years past. The very company maintaining those tunnels beneath the gardens. He represented them in a failed lawsuit involving misallocated land rights. Then he returned to the same ground, I said, perhaps to revisit old evidence. Holmes's expression softened into grim satisfaction, or to erase it. He seized his coat once more. We shall call on his partner, Mr. Vale. There is a scent of legality about this affair that reeks of deception. When we reached the firm's modest chambers off Lincoln's Inn, a pale clerk admitted us. The air smelled of dust and ink. Behind a desk sat Enoch Vallier, a gaunt man with parchment skin and eyes that seemed forever calculating. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he greeted, rising. I feared this call might come. Adrian Murch is dead, yes? Holmes inclined his head. You speak as one unsurprised. I knew it the moment the constables came asking at dawn. He left last night with those cursed plans of his. Said he was going to prove something at the gardens. Vale sank back into his chair. He'd been obsessed with a case long closed, the waterworks claim. Believed someone had altered the survey maps. Did he say who? Vale hesitated. Only that it concerned a section beneath the Serpentinian access tunnel sealed since the floods of '85. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Sealed, you say? And yet last night we heard movement below. The man blanched. Impossible! That passage was cemented years ago. Holmes's voice softened to a thread. Then who holds the key to the unsealed? Vale swallowed hard. The engineer, Mr. Pelham, keeps the master keys, but he's been abroad for months. Abroad? Holmes repeated, studying him, or conveniently absent. The man's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with a sheaf of papers. I can show you the register if you doubt me. Do so. While he searched, Holmes's gaze wandered to a half-open drawer. A glint of metal within caught the light. Swiftly he reached in and drew out a second can identical to Murch's, its cap unscrewed to reveal the same chalk-stained tube. Vale froze. That was left here Adrian's spare. Why, he must have forgotten it. Or you kept it to remember him by, Holmes said quietly. Tell me, Mr. Vale, how do two identical canes come to rest on opposite sides of a murder? The man's face was drained of colour. You think I think, Holmes interrupted. That silence travels faster than guilt, and yours is loud indeed. For a long moment only the faint scratching of the clerk's pen could be heard from the outer room. Tap, tap, tap. The same hollow rhythm as before. Holmes's eyes met mine. Do you hear it, Watson? The echo has found its next chamber. Before I could reply, Holmes had crossed the narrow office and laid his hand upon the partition wall. The faint tap, tap, tap continued beyond its steady, deliberate, metallic. Vale's breath caught in his throat. Your clerk, I presume? Holmes said softly. Yes, Vale stammered. Mr. Harbury, he's copying the morning briefs. Curious rhythm for a pen, Holmes murmured. More akin to a tool upon glass. He pushed open the door to the adjoining room. A young man sat at a high desk, head bent, spectacles glinting in the dim light. In his hand, not a pen but a small metal stylus tapped gently against a sheet pinned to a wooden board. When Holmes entered, the tapping ceased at once. Good morning, said Holmes pleasantly. May we see the document you're inscribing with such dedication? The clerk looked up, startled. It's merely a copy, sir, a chart from the waterworks file. Indeed. Allow me. Holmes stepped closer and, without waiting for permission, lifted the sheet. It was a meticulous sketch of underground mains pipes, junctions, valves all radiating beneath Kensington Gardens. A faint ring of chalk smudges marked the area corresponding to the Serpentine path. Where did you obtain the original? Holmes asked. Harbury hesitated. Mr. Vale gave it to me to transcribe last evening. He said Mr. Murch required it urgently. Vale's voice came sharp behind us. I told you that in confidence, Harbury. Holmes turned, eyes narrowing. Then you were aware that Murch planned to revisit the gardens. I merely provided him with reference material, Vale protested. The man was obsessed. Obsessed men seldom carry measuring canes of your design, Holmes replied. You supplied both instruments, yes? Vale swallowed. They were ordered for our work 2 years ago, surveying models. There was nothing sinister in it. Holmes's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before he addressed the clerk again. Did Murch mention whom he was to meet? No, sir, said Harbury, only that he'd settle a mistake tonight's buried mistake, he said. He laughed when I asked if it was a grave. Holmes's fingers twitched the motion and told me a deduction was forming. Buried mistake, he repeated. An engineer's phrase, Watson. Something concealed in the ground pipe wrongly laid, a junction sealed against regulation. But why kill to protect it? Vale interjected quickly. Perhaps he fell victim to thieves. Holmes ignored him. Harbury, when you traced this map, did you notice anything odd in the lines? Yes, sir. A small circle scratched faintly beneath the ink, hereby the west conduit. I thought it was accidental. Not accidental, Holmes murmured, but intentional and erased in subsequent copies. Mr. Vale, do you recall such a mark? No, I don't. Then you will, once you see it in daylight. Holmes folded the sheet and slipped it into his pocket. Come, Watson. We've learned what we can here. Outside, the air had turned crisp, the bustle of the morning crowd rising around us. Holmes strode rapidly toward the Strand, the echo of his cane striking pavement in a rhythm that matched the persistent tap-tap-tap in my mind. You suspect Vale directly? I asked. He is no killer by nature, Holmes said, but a man cornered by circumstance. His fear was genuine, yet his omissions were chosen. There lies our interest. And the clerk? Merely another echo, though echoes often reveal the chamber's shape. We reached a telegraph office where Holmes dispatched 2 urgent messages, one to Lestrade, requesting immediate examination of the tunnels beneath the gardens, another to the Waterworks Company, demanding the attendance of the absent engineer, Mr. Pelham, if he still breathes. Then he hailed a cab. To the archives, he told the driver. I must verify a map. As the wheels began their rhythm, Holmes's eyes half closed. Consider, Watson, the impossibility of footprints. Suppose the murderer did not approach from without, but from below. A man ascending through the hatch could strike unseen, then vanish back into silence. But how could Murch be lured to such a spot? By a summons he trusted, Holmes replied. A letter bearing Vale's signature, perhaps. The torn fragment you found spoke of warning, yet its tone was official. I believe Vale wrote it to delay him. Another intercepted it and turned it into bait. You think there were 2 conspirators? He nodded, one with knowledge of the tunnels, the other of the law. When such men meet, crime finds both passage and pardon. At the Public Records Office, Holmes pored over dusty ledgers for nearly an hour, tracing alterations in property lines near the Serpentine. Finally, he tapped a finger upon a faded entry. Here lies our buried mistake. In 1885, an unauthorized conduit was laid beneath the gardens, connecting private estate drains to the public mains. The engineer, responsible Pelham, the solicitor of Record Murch's firm, the approval signatures to Murch's and Vale's. Then both were implicated precisely. A concealed channel built for illicit drainage was profitable until discovery threatened ruin. Murch's conscience stirred, but Vale's did not. Our victim sought to expose what his partner wished to forget. Holmes replaced the ledger, and so Murch measured the ground to prove the line existed still. Someone met him there to ensure his silence remained perpetual. But that someone must have entered through the hatch, I said. Holmes smiled thinly. We shall confirm that soon enough. Lestrade's men will have their hands on iron by now. We returned to Baker Street to find a note awaiting us. Holmes read it aloud. Hatch discovered open, tunnel dry, 1 set of boot impressions inside. Ends at a sealed door marked West Conduit. Awaiting your direction. Lestrade. Holmes's eyes gleamed with rare satisfaction. He learns Watson. Come, we'll join him at once. As we set out again, the familiar motif arose anew, the horses' hooves striking cobblestone with that measured tap-tap-tap that had followed us since dawn. It seemed less an echo now than a summons, drawing us back toward the hollow, beneath the world. Lestrade awaited us at the garden's entrance, lantern in hand. We've opened the hatch, Mr. Holmes. Passage runs north-south about 30 yards, dry as a cellar and colder. Holmes descended first, his lamp throwing long shadows along the curved brick walls. The sound of dripping water punctuated our footsteps until, quite suddenly, another sound joined its soft, regular metallic tap-tap-tap. Lestrade whispered, "Someone's still down here." Holmes raised a hand for silence. The tapping stopped. We waited, breath held. Then from beyond the sealed iron door came 3 deliberate knocks in answer, slow, mocking hollow. Holmes's face hardened. So the echo lives, and it knows our name. Holmes signalled for the lantern to be lowered. Its light threw the tunnel into a trembling relief, wet brick, glistening mortar, the sheen of iron at the sealed end. The 3 knocks had ceased, yet the air still carried their vibration, as though the passage itself remembered. "Lestrade," Holmes said quietly, "your men how many entered before us?" "Only 2, both above now, guarding the hatch." "Good. Then whoever knocked is either within that chamber or has found another exit." Holmes stooped, examining the floor. "Footprints here are fresh, overlapping and small. A man of slight build, no taller than yourself, Watson." "Then not Vale," I murmured. "Indeed. And note this residue." He touched the ground, lifted his gloved fingers, and chalky dust clung to them. The same as in the cane, the murderer carried his trade with him. Lestrade drew his revolver. "Shall we break the door, Mr. Holmes?" "In due course. First listen." He pressed his ear against the iron. For a moment, nothing, then faintly. The unmistakable tap, 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 slower now, more deliberate, as if striking from within some hollow vault. Holmes smiled grimly. "Not a ghost, Inspector. A code, 3 short, 2 long Morse for the letter U." "U? That's no word?" "Not yet," Holmes replied. "Perhaps the beginning of one. Let us answer." He took a spanner from the tool rack and rapped the same pattern against the metal. Silence followed, then a single hollow thud, sharp as a coffin nail. Holmes straightened. He withdraws. "No more patience we shall enter." With Lestrade's help, he loosened the rusted bolts. The door groaned, the echo rolling through the tunnel like thunder. A cold drought met us, carrying the stench of stagnant water and something chemical. Holmes raised the lantern. "Observe, gentlemen, the laboratory of our engineer." The chamber beyond was narrow, lined with stone shelves and remnants of machinery, retorts, tubing, and a collapsed wooden table. On the floor lay scattered pages of blueprints, and against the far wall an open drain mouth half concealed by debris. Holmes moved swiftly, his eyes darting over every surface. He worked here long after this passage was sealed. See the soot on the ceiling, the candle ends, the scrap of bread in that tin signs of habitation. "Pelham never left London," Lestrade muttered. "Then he's been hiding under it." Holmes stooped beside a heap of charred paper. He burned his records, but not completely. "Here, Watson, what do you make of this?" I bent over a half-scorched plan. It bore the words "Diversion Channel Lease Branches subject to alteration." "He was diverting water from the mains," I said. "Possibly for profit." "Or for concealment," Holmes added. "A private conduit accessible only from below, perfect for theft or movement unseen." Our Mr. Murch discovered that Pelham silenced him. Lestrade frowned. "If he's still here, we'll flush him out." Holmes shook his head. "No need. He has already left us his confession." He pointed to the drain mouth. The edges were smeared with fresh chalk, forming 3 parallel streaks. A sign made in haste. The same code continued, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, S, combined with the earlier letter US. "US?" Lestrade asked blankly. Holmes's expression tightened. Not initials, but a fragment. Perhaps the beginning of the word under. I felt a chill. "You think he's still beneath us further in?" Holmes nodded. "These tunnels extend beyond official maps, and if Pelham knows them as I believe, he could travel miles before surfacing." He turned suddenly, eyes bright. "But recall the sound's change of direction earlier, first beneath, then across the water. There must be a secondary outlet into the serpentine itself." Lestrade cursed softly. "Then he could
Emerge anywhere along the bank." "Exactly. Which is why," Holmes said, striding to the drain, "we must act now." He dropped to his knees, lantern poised. "Watson, hold this. I shall enter first. The opening is narrow but passable. Holmes, surely? No time, my dear fellow. Lestrade, have men posted along the northern shore. If I'm correct, he will aim for the old sluice gate." I held the lantern steady as he crawled into the aperture, his coat brushing stone. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap returned faintly, but this time from his own movements, echoing forward into blackness. Minutes passed, agonizingly slow. Then, far ahead, a sharper clatter collision of metal on stone, and Holmes's voice, faint but urgent. "Light here, Watson! Quickly!" I squeezed through after him, emerging into a lower passage where the air turned wet and fetid. Holmes stood beside a set of pipes leading upward, one valve freshly broken. "Look," he said. "The lock was forced recently. Our man escaped through here. Lestrade's lantern followed. Then he's in the lake?" "Not yet," Holmes replied. "The pipe rises to a maintenance shaft ending near the bandstand, the same point where we found the cane." I felt a tremor of real dread. And Pelham was there even as we examined the body? Undoubtedly. He watched, perhaps listened, and when we left he retrieved his instrument of deception. Holmes examined the valve more closely, sniffing the residue on its rim. Ether. He used it to stun Murch before striking the fatal blow explains the lack of struggle. Lestrade grimaced. "Clever devil." Holmes's voice softened. "Cleverness without conscience, Inspector, is merely precision without purpose. Come, we'll meet him where the air resumes." We emerged through a narrow shaft opening onto the base of the bandstand. Sunlight filtered through the slats above, painting stripes across the gravel. Holmes brushed dust from his coat. "Lestrade, double the guard at every gate of the gardens. Our man will soon surface." "And if he doesn't?" "He will," Holmes said, "because the echo is incomplete." He must finish the word. "What word?" I asked. Holmes looked toward the water. "The one he began below, under." "He will return to complete it, understand." Criminals crave acknowledgement, Watson, even from their hunters. A distant cry carried from across the gardens, followed by the unmistakable tap-tap-tap. This time frantic, ascending the path like a heartbeat gone wild. Holmes drew a deep breath. There. Our echo calls again. Holmes was already moving toward the sound, his pace unhurried yet precise, every step attuned to the rhythm that pulsed through the gardens. Lestrade and I followed close behind, the morning crowd thinning before us as though sensing the chase beneath our calm exterior. The tap-tap-tap grew louder, metal against stone, measured, insistent. There, Holmes breathed, by the west path near the boathouse. A figure stood on the embankment, half hidden by reeds. He was slight, stooped, his clothing stained with chalk and damp earth. In his right hand he held a long iron rod, which he struck rhythmically against the paving tap-tap-tap. When he turned, the pale eyes and hollow cheeks left no doubt. "Mr. Pelham, I presume?" Holmes said evenly. The man blinked, expressionless. "So the echo has found me." Holmes inclined his head. "Or you found it, by choice? You've been within the tunnels since the night of Murch's death." Pelham's voice was thin but steady. "I lived there long before his death, Mr. Holmes." He only stumbled into my silence. Lestrade stepped forward, revolver ready. "You'll come quietly, sir. We've seen the hatch, the blueprints, the ether." The engineer smiled faintly. "Inspector, the law always arrives one knock too late." He raised the rod again, struck 3 short beats upon the stone tap-tap-tap. "You've heard that before, haven't you?" Holmes's tone softened. "A signal? Between you and your accomplice?" "Accomplice?" Pelham gave a short, dry laugh. "You mean Vale? Oh, he was no partner, only a coward seeking profit. He forged documents, yes, but he lacked courage to bury them. So I buried the evidence and the man who would expose it." "Then you admit the murder?" Lestrade said. I admit silence, Pelham replied. The earth holds secrets better than men. Holmes's eyes never left him. You sought not gain, but erasure. You could have fled years ago, yet you remained beneath London, tending your hollow empire. Because it listens, Pelham whispered. Down there, every drop and echo tells the truth. Up here, only noise. The tremor in his voice stirred a kind of pity. He seemed less a villain than a soul consumed by his own solitude. Holmes sensed it too, and his manner grew almost compassionate. You killed a man, Pelham, not to conceal crime, but to preserve silence. But silence is no sanctuary. It is evidence of guilt in another tongue. The engineer's gaze flicked toward the water, where sunlight shimmered like quicksilver. You think you understand, Holmes answered quietly. I intend to. Without warning, Pelham hurled the iron rod into the lake and leapt after it. The water erupted in a violent splash. Lestrade shouted and plunged to the edge, but Holmes caught his arm. Hold, Inspector! He will not swim far. The surface rippled, then stilled. No head emerged. Only a faint bubbling sound rose, followed by that eerie tap-tap-tap, fainter now, hollow, coming from beneath the surface. Good Lord, I whispered. He's under the conduit. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The very shaft we traced. He's chosen his own grave. Lestrade signalled to the constables. Drag the water! Holmes turned sharply. No, wait! The tapping had shifted tone faster, urgent, uneven. Holmes crouched at the bank, listening. He's striking from within the iron chamber below, perhaps trapped by the current. Those are not words, it's distress. Lestrade hesitated, then barked orders. Ropes and grappling hooks were fetched. Men waded waist deep. The metallic rhythm faltered, became a single dull thud, then silence.
Holmes exhaled slowly. He's gone. The tunnel claimed its keeper. For a moment none of us spoke. The water lapped quietly against the stones, mocking our helplessness. Lestrade wiped his brow. That ends it then. A confession drowned. A partner to answer for it. Holmes shook his head. It ends nothing, Inspector. The dead man's silence tells only half the truth. The other half sits in a solicitor's office, shaking behind legal parchment. Veil again, I said. Indeed. Pelham's guilt absolves neither his aid nor his inspiration. We must see Veil before word reaches him of this morning's event. The ride to Lincoln's Inn passed in uneasy quiet. Holmes stared out the cab window, lips compressed, every line of his face alive with suppressed energy. The steady clatter of hooves against cobblestone kept time with the vanished tapping hour motif, transformed into memory. Watson, he said suddenly, what does a man do when confronted by the proof of his own deceit? Some deny it, others flee. Veil will do neither, Holmes murmured. He will rewrite it. When we arrived, the clerk Harbury met us at the door, pale and anxious. Mr. Veil isn't here, sir. He left an hour ago and said he was going to the notary's in Chancery Lane. Holmes's eyes flickered. Carrying papers? Yes, sir. A thick envelope, sealed. Forged deeds, Holmes muttered. He means to destroy or alter them before arrest. Lestrade turned toward the street. We'll catch him there. But Holmes held him. No need. He will return. Cowards always circle back to the scene of safety. He crossed to Veil's desk, searching briefly. Ah, Watson, look at this. He held up a small tin cylinder identical to the one found in Murch's cane, another chalk tube empty, used for marking false survey lines. Or for letters, Holmes said. Note the residue on his fingertips, chalk dust mingled with ink. He's been writing something meant to vanish at the first touch of water. An invisible confession, I suggested, perhaps a plea. Holmes turned the cylinder over and tapped it lightly. Tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to travel through the wood of the desk, dull and final. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. Vale burst into the room, face drawn, hat askew, breathing hard. His eyes darted to the object in Holmes's hand. "Give me that," he gasped. Holmes regarded him coolly. "You arrive precisely as expected. Mr. Pelham's final signal was not meant for us, but for you." The man staggered, clutching the edge of the desk. "Have you seen him?" "I heard him," Holmes said, "and now you will hear what he left unfinished." He struck the desk thrice with the cylinder tap, 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 and waited. The sound hung in the air, unanswered. Vale sank slowly into the chair, face buried in his hands. "Then he's dead." "Yes," Holmes said softly, "drowned in the echo he created. But your conscience still breathes, Mr. Vale, and the law is not half so silent as the lake." The solicitor raised his head, eyes wet. "He made me sign it. He said it would save us both." "What did you sign?" "The diversion plans," he whispered. "They rerouted the main beneath the gardens to a private reservoir he used to hide stolen industrial waste. When Murch learned, he threatened exposure. Pelham swore he'd handle it, and he did." Holmes nodded gravely. "And now you will handle what remains." From the street came a carriage bell and the rattle of wheels, each note merging with the ghostly cadence of that fading motif. Holmes rose, his voice low. "Watson, the echo may be dying, but its shadow lingers still. Let us see where it leads." Holmes did not move until the last note of the carriage bell had faded into the street's hum. Vale sat hunched, staring at the desk as though it might absolve him. The faint creak of the floorboard seemed to fill the silence between us, a softer echo of that endless tap-tap-tap, now absorbed into our very nerves. "Mr. Vale," Holmes said at last, "you will write your statement before Inspector Lestrade arrives. But before you do, tell me, what was in the envelope you carried to Chancery Lane?" Vale's fingers twitched. "A deed of indemnity. If Pelham died, I was to inherit his remaining patents." "Worthless now." Holmes studied him, expression unreadable. "So you went not to destroy evidence, but to secure profit." "I swear I meant to return it," Vale said quickly. "When I heard the constables were at the gardens, you feared discovery and wished to amend your will to match your conscience," Holmes interrupted. "Conscience, however, does not reside in legal parchment. It writes its confessions elsewhere." The solicitor's eyes darted toward the chalk cylinder, still on the table. "You found it, then, the message I left?" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Message?" Vale hesitated, then reached for the cylinder. "Inside, beneath the lining. He told me to keep it sealed until I heard 3 knocks upon my door." Holmes's hand shot out, stopping him. "Pray do not open it." He lifted the cylinder delicately, held it to the light, and turned it slowly. A faint powder shifted within. "Watson," he said, noted the odor. I leaned closer. "It smells faintly metallic phosphorus?" "Precisely," Holmes murmured. "A chemical reagent, no doubt meant to erase writing by combustion. Pelham designed his own message to destroy itself upon exposure to air. The man's sense of theatre survived even death." Vale's voice cracked. "Then we'll never know what it contained." "Oh, I think we shall," Holmes said quietly. "Observe." He fetched a shallow basin of water from the clerk's washstand, submerged the cylinder, and prized the end loose under the surface. A strip of waxed paper slid free, letters blooming faintly as the chemical met moisture. The words were few, but each deliberate, understood. "Vale pays in silence." A tremor ran through the solicitor. "He meant me to take his place?" Holmes replaced the strip gently upon the desk. "He meant that your silence was bought and therefore shared. but in killing Murch, he paid the debt himself. You are merely the witness who failed to speak. The man buried his face in his hands. God help me. Holmes's tone remained cool. God may, but the law will be punctual. He turned to me. Watson, fetch Lestrade. Before I could move, there came a sudden commotion from the outer corridor, a scuffle of boots, a gasp, and the sound of something shattering. The clerk Harbury burst in, white-faced, clutching a crumpled telegram. Mr. Vale, Sir Inspector Lestrade, he's been struck. Holmes was beside him instantly. Where? Just outside the courtyard gate. Someone threw a bottle. He's down. Holmes dashed to the window. Through the grimy pane we saw Lestrade's men gathered around their fallen superior. One pointed toward a retreating figure disappearing into the alley, a tall man in a dark coat moving with desperate speed. Holmes's eyes flared. Pelham? Impossible, I said. He drowned. Then his echo walks. He seized his hat and was gone before I could answer. I followed, heart pounding. The streets of Lincoln's Inn echoed with pursuit, the slap of boots, the cry of constables. At each corner the rhythmic tap-tap-tap returned, faint and mocking, leading us onward like a lure. The fugitive darted through an archway into Fetter Lane, scattering carts and shouting at pedestrians. Holmes ran with astonishing precision, calculating each turn as if he had traced it in advance. There, I cried, by the ironworks. The man vanished through a narrow gate into the yard beyond. Holmes vaulted the chain after him. I stumbled through the smoke that hung heavy in the air. When my eyes cleared, he had the stranger by the collar, forcing him into the light. It was not Pelham. The captured man was younger, dishevelled, wearing a labourer's coat several sizes too large. In his right hand he still gripped a long iron rod, the same type the engineer had wielded. Holmes snatched it away and tapped it once upon the ground. The sound was identical tap-tap-tap. Lestrade, pale but upright, arrived moments later, bandaged and furious. Caught him, have you? Who is he? Holmes turned the lantern toward the man's face. You tell us, Mr. Harbury. The clerk flinched. You knew. From the moment I saw your spectacles, Holmes said. The lenses bore residue of chalk dust identical to that on the plans. You were Pelham's messenger, his voice above ground. Harbury's shoulders sagged. He promised payment only to signal when it was safe. I never thought he'd kill. Yet you aided his concealment, Holmes said. The taps we heard in Vale's office came from your stylus, warning him of our presence. Lestrade shoved the man toward his officers. Enough talk. You'll tell the rest at the yard? Holmes nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the iron rod. The sound will stop now, but its pattern remains 3 short beats, the rhythm of deceit. You see, Watson, even the smallest accomplice keeps time with his master. We returned to Baker Street as evening descended, the gas lights flickering in the mist. Holmes stood before the fire, silent for a long time. The faint hiss of the flame replaced the tapping, different sound, same pulse of thought. Pelham is dead, I said at last. Vale will stand trial. The clerk confesses it's finished. Holmes shook his head. Finished perhaps for the courts, but not for understanding. Pelham's final word understood was not confession, but challenge. He believed none would grasp the motive behind his silence. He killed not to conceal theft, but to preserve order, an engineer's twisted devotion to structure. To him, chaos was the true enemy. And Vale? Vale mistook survival for absolution. He will learn that silence, once purchased, demands eternal interest. He turned from the fire, the light catching his face in sharp relief. Do you hear it still, Watson? What? That rhythm, the city beneath its own heartbeat. And indeed, through the window, drifted the faint tap-tap-tap of a distant workman's hammer, echoing the motif that had carried us from dawn to dusk. Holmes listened, head slightly bowed, as if measuring each note against the unseen patterns of the world. The footsteps that led nowhere, he murmured, were merely those of men who mistook stillness for safety. He reached for his pipe. The ember flared, hissed softly, and died. Somewhere outside, the hammer struck once more, slowly, hollow, fading into silence. Holmes kept his gaze fixed upon the window-pane, where the reflection of the fire wavered like a restless thought. The hammer's echo beyond the glass dwindled until it seemed only the memory of sound, the city exhaling into stillness. I had come to know that silence, it meant Holmes was arranging the fragments of truth into their final pattern. "Watson," he said at last, "the case remains incomplete. We have a body, a confession, and an accomplice, yet the equation refuses balance. Something in the pattern eludes symmetry. You speak as though the crime were a formula. To an engineer such as Pelham, it was precisely that. Yet I misread one variable." He turned from the window, eyes gleaming with renewed precision. Pelham could not have forged the diversion plans alone. The handwriting on the recovered fragment, did you observe the curvature of the S in subject? I did not. It was rounded and open feminine in form, not the engineer's tight script. "There is a fourth participant." I started. "Another conspirator?" "Not a conspirator, Watson Scribe. The hand that drew the map." He opened his desk drawer and extracted the charred scrap we had recovered from the underground chamber. "See here, the signature line is missing, but a flourish remains, one I have seen before, in the registry of Murch and Vale's correspondence." "Whose?" Holmes smiled faintly. "The late Mr. Murch's secretary, Miss Clara Edison." I recalled the name dimly. "The quiet young woman at the inquest last winter. She disappeared soon after." "Precisely. She drew every survey copied by that firm, including those involving Pelham's schemes. When Murch threatened exposure, Pelham must have sought her help to falsify the final diagram. Her disappearance preceded his descent into hiding." "You think she was murdered as well?" Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson, I think she survives, and that she holds the last proof Pelham feared." Before I could respond, a soft tap, tap, tap sounded from the outer door. 3 gentle beats, the echo of our motif returned. Mrs. Hudson's voice followed. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes met mine. "You see, Watson, the city obeys rhythm even when it believes itself free of it. Admit her." A tall, pale woman entered, her gloved hands clutching a folded parcel. Her expression carried the exhaustion of long concealment. "Mr. Holmes," she said quietly, "I was told you would understand this." She laid the parcel on the table. Holmes gestured for her to sit. "Miss Clara Edison, I presume." She gave a faint start. "Then you know my name?" "I know the pattern of your penmanship," Holmes replied. "A most elegant betrayer. You worked for Mr. Murch." "I did, until the night he died." Her voice trembled. "He came to my lodgings that evening with documents proof that Mr. Vale and Mr. Pelham had falsified the waterworks records. He asked me to prepare an accurate map for the authorities. Before I could finish, he left, saying he must deliver a warning first. The next morning, I read of his death." Holmes inclined his head. "And you vanished. I feared Pelham would find me. I hid the true map where even he could not reach." Holmes unfolded the parcel. Inside lay a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. Across its surface stretched a meticulously drawn plan of the underground system, each tunnel marked with minute precision. Holmes examined it closely. "Remarkable. You reversed the ink layers, the authentic lines beneath the forgeries, the missing conduit, the hidden chamber. They align perfectly with Pelham's lair." She nodded. It was his masterpiece of deceit. He diverted not water, but industrial refuse from several factories, draining it into the serpentine subchannels. Did you notice the smell below? Strongly chemical, I said. Acid waste, she whispered. Enough to poison the water for thousands if exposed. Holmes's face hardened. Then Murch's death saved London from a scandal, but not from danger. The waste remains beneath the gardens, sealed yet volatile. Miss Edison's voice broke. I tried to tell the police. No one believed a woman's account of engineering. You were wise to come to me instead, Holmes said gently. The truth will not vanish this time. He turned to me. Watson? Note the coordinates along the lower margin. These correspond to the junction where Pelham entered the conduit. If my calculations are correct, the acid has eroded the seal between tunnels. One tremor could release it. Then the city is in peril. Not yet, but we must act before nightfall. He folded the map carefully and placed it in his coat. Miss Edison, you will accompany Inspector Lestrade to the yard. Your testimony will be our
safeguard. I shall see to the chamber itself. She rose, pale but resolute. Will you descend again into that place? Holmes gave a brief smile. When silence threatens to speak too loudly, someone must listen to its grammar. Moments later, we were in a cab once more, the sound of wheels carrying our recurring rhythm down the fog-veiled streets. Holmes, I said, you mean to enter the tunnels alone? I mean to verify that the world still stands upon solid ground, my dear fellow. If Pelham's design remains unstable, we must neutralize it before it speaks in fire. At Kensington Gardens, the constables had cordoned the bandstand, the hatch gaping like an open wound. Lestrade met us with a lantern. More trouble, Mr. Holmes? Merely the conclusion, Holmes replied. The poison he buried may yet have a voice. He descended without hesitation. I followed close behind, the tunnel echoing with each footfall, tap, 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 the same cadence that had carried us from the window's first knock to this final descent. The air grew sharp with chemical fumes. Holmes stopped near the iron plate we had uncovered before. There, he said, the chalk marks fresh again. I bent low. But who? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Someone else has entered since Pelham's death, someone trying to erase his work. At that instant, a muffled sound rose from ahead, a single metallic clang, then a rush of gas-like breath escaping from the earth itself. Holmes turned sharply and the lantern lifted. Back, Watson! The seal is breaking! The words drowned in a deep, resonant roar that rolled through the chamber like thunder from beneath the city. The roar reverberated through the tunnel with the weight of an earthquake. Dust showered from the ceiling, and the lantern in Holmes's grasp flared violently before dimming to a sickly glow. A gust of acrid vapour swept past us, thick with the sting of sulphur and decay. Back! Holmes shouted, but his voice was nearly drowned in the echoing tumult. It's the residue, venting through the fissure. Hold your breath, Watson. We staggered toward the hatch, the light swaying wildly across the trembling walls. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise collapsed into silence. Only the faint tap-tap-tap of dripping condensation punctuated the gloom, a ghostly repetition of the case's relentless rhythm. Holmes steadied himself against the wall, eyes gleaming in the half-light. That, Watson, was the city exhaling its secret. Good heavens, Holmes, I gasped. The chamber could have exploded. Quite possibly, he murmured, already moving toward the breach. But note the sound that followed. The pressure equalized instead of detonating. Something or someone opened a secondary vent. We are not alone. Lestrade, pale and coughing, descended from above. What in blazes was that? Half the park shook. Holmes raised a hand for quiet listening. A faint rustle carried down the passage, followed by another tap, 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 faster now. Urgent, Human. There, Holmes whispered. Beyond the bend, lantern.
Forward, Inspector, slowly. We advanced through the haze until the beam revealed a figure kneeling beside a cracked valve, wrench in hand. The man turned, his face streaked with soot and sweat. It was Vale. He blinked at us through the fumes, his voice hoarse. "It's leaking!" The pressure chamber was splitting open. I had to release it before it burst. Holmes regarded him coolly. "An altruist, Mr. Vale. I confess the role sits oddly upon you." "I swear it, Holmes," Vale cried. "I came to repair what Pelham began. I couldn't let his madness destroy the gardens." Lestrade seized his arm. "You're under arrest already, sir. Heroics won't wash your hands." But Holmes motioned him aside. Let him speak. Vale slumped against the wall, breathing hard. I knew he'd built a secondary outlet, one he never marked on the plans. After you left my office, I remembered the formula he'd scribbled years ago. Pressure requires confession. It came to me what he meant. The chamber was designed to release itself after a set strain. He wanted his crime to announce itself when I failed to confess mine. Holmes's eyes glinted. Then Pelham engineered not only his tunnels but his revenge. Ingenious symmetry. "He was mad," Vale whispered. "He built death into the architecture." Holmes crouched beside the valve, examining the splintered pipe. "Madness, yes, but meticulous. The fail-safe channel here leads toward the old sluice gate. The gases vent harmlessly into the deeper drainage." He calculated every possibility but one. "What was that?" I asked. "Conscience," Holmes replied softly. He accounted for metal and pressure, but not the human impulse to amend. "You see, Vale, your attempt to repair his work has likely saved more than the gardenist has completed the very formula he devised. His machine required balance. Your remorse provided it." Vale stared at him as though struck. "Then it's safe?" "For the moment," Holmes said, "but the remaining chemical residue must be neutralized. Inspector, telegraph the engineers of the Metropolitan Works at once. They must flood the lower tunnels before nightfall." Lestrade nodded grimly and hurried toward the hatch. The echo of his retreating boots merged with the dripping cadence of water, forming once more that spectral rhythm, steady, precise, inevitable. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, do you see how order emerges from chaos when observed at its proper frequency? Each action, however foul, produces its counterpoint. You sound almost forgiving, Holmes." "Not forgiving," Watson understands. "There lies the difference between judge and observer." Vale's voice came faintly behind us. "I never wished for any of this. I wanted quiet stability. He promised we could vanish beneath the noise." Holmes looked back at him. "And yet the quiet consumed you. The silence you purchased grew loud enough to kill. You must now teach the courts what silence costs." The man's head bowed. "I will tell you everything." "Do so while the city still breathes," Holmes said. "Pelham's genius will not outlast its purpose." We made our way toward the surface, the fumes thinning with each step. Through the open hatch, morning light spilled down in trembling shafts. As I climbed after Holmes, the sound of distant hammering resumed from somewhere beyond the gardens, the motif reborn in ordinary life, its menace spent. Once above, I drew in the clean air with relief. Lestrade awaited us, his coat streaked with grime, but his expression triumphant. "Engineers are on their way, Mr. Holmes. They'll purge the mains before dusk." "Excellent," Holmes replied. The city owes its quiet to an irony that the murderer's design could only be silenced by the guilt of his accomplice. Lestrade eyed Vale, now handcuffed between two constables. "And this one?" "Take him gently," Holmes said. "He has already surrendered to the echo that judged him." We watched as they led the man away. The constable's boots struck the path in perfect rhythm, tap, 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 fading into distance. Holmes stood very still, head tilted toward the faint sound. "Curious," he murmured. "The same cadence persists whether in guilt, confession, or mere movement. The world continues its tapping, indifferent to motive." I looked toward the serpentine where ripples spread across the silver surface. "Do you suppose Pelham wanted that to make the city remember him with every sound?" Holmes's lips curved into the faintest smile. "If so, he succeeded far too well. His footsteps will never be traced, yet they will never quite cease." He turned abruptly, eyes thoughtful. "There remains one question, Watson. How did Miss Edison know the seal would break today? She arrived too soon for coincidence. You think she knew Vale might return?" "I think," Holmes said, "she knew something none of us did, that Pelham's contrivance was designed to respond to a signal. 3 knocks upon metal, repeated anywhere along the system." My breath caught. Then our very search, the tapping of the valve, the hammer at the works. "Precisely," Holmes said. "We triggered the confession ourselves. The realization hung between us like the lingering scent of gas. Below, the tunnel groaned faintly, a final exhalation of pressure easing through stone." Holmes looked toward the horizon, where the chimneys of London stood against the pale afternoon sky. "So ends the architecture of silence," he said quietly. "Yet its echo remains for men who will always build chambers to contain their guilt." From far away, a single metallic strike answered him, clear, solitary, deliberate. The metallic strike that followed Holmes's final words seemed to pierce the air with surgical precision, one clean note, then silence. Holmes's eyes narrowed, the faint smile vanishing from his lips. That, Watson, was no coincidence. Lestrade turned sharply. "You heard it too. I thought it was just a tool dropped by the engineers." Holmes shook his head. The sound was neither random nor mechanical. It bore resonance, a deliberate rhythm, metallic against hollow stone. "Someone answered the system's last breath." "Then you mean Pelham?" "Dead," Inspector Holmes interrupted. "But his network is alive, and someone else now commands its echo." He strode toward the hatch once more, ignoring Lestrade's protest. "We have time for one descent before the engineers flood it." "Come, Watson, or ghost still speaks." The constables exchanged glances, but I followed without hesitation. The ladder rungs burned cold beneath my hands. The staleness of the tunnel met us like the breath of a crypt. The air was calmer now, the earlier fumes replaced by a faint, mineral tang. Holmes paused midway, listening. The tap-tap-tap resumed faintly ahead, 3 short strokes, then 2. The very pattern we had heard before Pelham's death. "You see?" Holmes murmured. "The dialogue continues." Lestrade, who had reluctantly followed, muttered, "If anyone's down here, we'll have him out. I'll send for more men." "No," said Holmes sharply. "Too much weight upon the structure could collapse the remaining conduit." "This conversation requires quiet." We advanced in single file through the damp corridor. The lantern's light glimmered across the wet bricks like a string of amber beads. At the bend, the sound ceased abruptly. Holmes motioned for the light to be lowered. "There," he whispered. "Observe the wall ahead. The moisture runs differently along those bricks, thicker, slower. Behind it lies a narrow recess." "Hand me your walking stick, Watson." I passed it to him, and he tapped gently along the wall. On the 3rd strike, the stone yielded with a hollow tone. He pressed, and a small section swung inward on rusted hinges, revealing a cavity scarcely large enough for a man to crouch. Within it sat a wooden crate fitted with copper wiring, its surface etched with faint chalk symbols. A single wire led upward, disappearing into the ceiling of the tunnel. Holmes knelt, examining the construction. "Remarkable," he murmured. "A resonating relay and acoustic transmitter built upon Pelham's principles. Each metallic strike upon any connected surface would amplify through this chamber and rebound across the network. Our final sound was not farewell, but activation. Activation of what? I asked. Holmes's expression darkened. A signal, one that may have reached beyond this chamber. Lestrade peered over his shoulder. You mean someone built this after Pelham died? Or Pelham built it long before, intending it for whoever followed. He examined the chalk markings more closely. Do you see, Watson? These notations correspond to addresses encoded through engineering coordinates. So this device does not call to the dead, it calls another station. Then there's a second chamber, unquestionably, said Holmes, possibly beneath the very offices of Merchant Vale, the perfect counterpart to this infernal lung beneath the gardens. The implication chilled me. Then every tap we've made, every sound has been heard elsewhere. Holmes rose, the lantern light flickering across his face, and perhaps answered.
Watson, the rhythm has always been communication, not coincidence. Pelham's system allowed conspirators to speak across the city without a word. Lestrade's jaw tightened. You're saying this whole thing, murders, forgeries, tunnels, built for smuggling messages? Not smuggling, Inspector. Concealment. Sound travels where paper betrays. Each tap along the pipe could represent a word, a number, an instruction. Think 2 years of waterworks labourers, unaware they carried letters instead of liquid. I felt a cold awe. Then Pelham was less murderer than messenger. Holmes's voice dropped to a whisper. Both. He delivered silence wrapped in sound. And now someone else attempts to reopen his line. He examined the crate again, fingertips tracing the wire. This end has been spliced recently. Note the clean cut and new solder. Our intruder connected a modern telegraph coil to amplify the signal. Lestrade frowned. So the accomplice is still free? Holmes nodded. Miss Edison knew this system better than anyone alive. If she misjudged its stability, she may have activated it unintentionally. You suspect her? Suspect? Holmes said quietly. No, I fear for her. She may have gone to destroy the second device. Before Lestrade could reply, a faint vibration trembled through the floor, a distant rhythmic pulse like machinery awakening. Holmes's head snapped up. Listen. Through the ironwork above us came 3 short tones, followed by one longer variation of the old signal, but magnified as though struck by industrial force. The sound shuddered through the tunnel, rolling like thunder trapped in metal. Holmes's hand tightened on the lantern. The sequence changed. It's not a reply, it's ignition. Good Lord, Holmes, what does that mean? It means, he said grimly, that the second chamber is preparing to vent the remaining chemicals. Someone has triggered the full system, perhaps thinking it will erase evidence, perhaps unaware it could poison half of London. Lestrade's face was drained of colour. Then what are we waiting for? Holmes's gaze hardened. For the moment the city inhales. We have perhaps 1 hour before it exhales destruction. He closed the panel gently, his movements precise. We go now to Chancery Lane. The second relay will be beneath the old firm's archives. If we reach it before the engineers flood the tunnels, we may avert catastrophe. We raced back toward the ladder, the metallic pulse above growing louder, faster, until it merged with the pounding of our hearts. The rhythm was no longer a mere motif, but a countdown. At the surface, the fog had thickened, blurring the gaslights into pale halos. Holmes hailed a cab with an urgency I had rarely seen. Watson, he said as we clambered in, noted how even calamity keeps time. The hand that built this network designed its finale as a perfect chord. Pelham's silence will end, not with whisper, but with resonance. I caught the distant rumble spreading through the streets, a vibration felt more than heard.
Holmes, I whispered, is it possible that sound itself could destroy a city? He looked out through the mist, the glint in his eyes both fierce and calm. "If one man understood how to make it sing, Watson, then yes, it could." And far beneath us, the tapping continued steady, swelling, alive. The cab rattled through the shrouded streets, its wheels striking cobblestones in rapid counterpoint to the subterranean pulse that throbbed beneath London's skin. Holmes sat forward, gloved hands clasped tightly on his knees, every muscle in his lean frame tuned to the same invisible rhythm. "Watson," he said, his voice taut, "when a machine is built upon balance, the smallest disturbance can unravel it. Pelham's design relied on harmony, acoustic, chemical and moral. He is gone, yet his mechanism seeks equilibrium still. If Miss Edison has reached the other relay, she may be seconds from disaster." I felt the carriage lurch around a corner, but how could she have known where it lay? "She drew the maps," Holmes replied. "She carried the city in her head as others carried prayers. When she learned of the fissure, she must have gone to seal the second vent, unaware the system would interpret her intervention as a signal. Outside, the air trembled faintly. A deep hum rolled beneath the wheels of vibration that made the window glass quiver. Holmes's eyes flicked upward. It has already spread. The whole network resonates. We arrived at Chancery Lane to find the old law offices deserted save for a single lamp burning in the basement windows. Holmes motioned for silence and drew his revolver. He who built a city's breath taught it to whisper in pipes and walls. Let us see what it now confesses. We descended the narrow stair. The door to the archive stood ajar, a pale light flickering within. A soft tap-tap-tap sounded measured, almost tentative. Holmes entered first. Miss Clara Edison knelt before a copper cylinder half the size of a man, her trembling hands tightening a valve with a spanner. Sweat gleamed on her brow. Her eyes, when she looked up, were wild with fear. "Mr. Holmes, thank God! I couldn't stop it!" Holmes crouched beside her, examining the device. "You tried to close the circuit?" "Yes, but the pressure increases the more I tighten it. Pelham built it to feed on resistance." Holmes's voice softened. "Then we must release, not resist." He turned the spanner gently the other way. A hiss escaped, and the tap-tap-tap transformed into a low, steady hum. "Good. We have bought minutes, perhaps less." Lestrade burst in behind us, breathless. "The street's vibrating." "What in heaven's name Pelham's finale?" Holmes said. "A harmonic chain through every conduit in London. The tunnels will collapse or vent their gases if we fail to break resonance." Miss Edison clutched his arm. "There's another control beneath the floor. He showed me once. A tuning valve to equalize pressure." Holmes nodded sharply. "Show me." Together we prized up a heavy grate, revealing a shallow pit filled with pipes and glowing gauges. One needle trembled at the verge of red. Holmes knelt, listening to the metal itself. "Watson, note the pattern. It beats in threes still, but faster." He designed the system to synchronize with the city's own pulse, the factory whistles, the steam trams, even the clock towers. Every sound now feeds it. "Then it cannot be stopped," Lestrade cried. "Not stopped," Holmes murmured. "Redirected." He traced the pipes with quick precision. "This line connects to the engineer's main vent at the gardens. If we open the auxiliary here, we can force the remaining gas back through the original breach, where the open air will dissipate it. But it will ignite," I warned. Holmes smiled thinly. "Then let it burn where the air is clean." He turned to Miss Edison. "When I give the word, strike that valve 3 times hard. It will carry the signal through the metal. Watson, stand ready to open this release wheel halfway. No more, or the shock will kill us all." I swallowed hard. Ready. Holmes drew his watch, its ticking lost in the deep rumble around us. "When the next tremor peaks now, The chamber erupted in motion. I spun the wheel as ordered. Miss Edison struck the valve thrice, tap, tap, tap. And from beneath the floor came a roar like thunder tearing through iron. The building shook, lights flickered, and a surge of hot air blasted upward. Holmes gripped the edge of the grate, his face lit ghost-like by the flare. "Watson, hold fast! The current reverses!" Through the open doorway I glimpsed the street outside, awash in rising steam. Distant bells rang, windows rattled, and then sudden stillness. Holmes listened, every line of his body alert. The hum had ceased. No drip, no pulse, no echo, only the faint crackle of settling pipes. "Is it over?" Miss Edison whispered. Holmes exhaled, straightened, and shut his watch with a snap. The city breathes again. Pelham's song is finished. Lestrade slumped against the doorframe. "By all that's holy, Holmes, I thought London was about to collapse." Holmes smiled faintly. "Not collapse, Inspector, confess? Every city holds its guilt below the paving stones today. London merely spoke aloud." He turned to Miss Edison. "Your courage has preserved it. Few could have read his madness with such clarity." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "He wasn't always mad, Mr. Holmes. Once he built for light, not darkness. I remember him saying that sound was the soul of motion." Holmes's gaze softened, and he proved it tragically. He looked toward the street where a faint breeze carried the scent of scorched metal. "Come, Watson, our work below is done, but I suspect the true reckoning waits above." We emerged into a transformed world. Steam vented gently from the manhole crowds gathered, murmuring in awe. The fog had lifted, replaced by a pearly haze through which the sun glowed weakly. Holmes surveyed the scene in silence. "London will never know how near it came to eternal silence," I said. "Perhaps it should not," he replied. "Some truths, like Pelham's, must remain buried lest others attempt their music." Miss Edison stood behind us, pale but composed. "Will it end here, Mr. Holmes?" He looked at her with that peculiar tenderness he reserved for the rarest of souls. "So long as men seek order in chaos, the echo will return. But for tonight, Miss Edison, let us be content with quiet." The last of the steam hissed through the grates, soft as breath. Holmes inclined his head, listening. "Do you hear it, Watson? The sound? Yes, the absence of it." And then, faint and distant, as if acknowledging its own demise, came 3 slow knocks from somewhere deep beneath the earth. The 3 slow knocks rolled upward from the depths, faint yet distinct, as though London itself acknowledged our presence one final time. Holmes did not stir. He stood motionless upon the cobblestones, head inclined slightly, his profile drawn in sharp relief against the pale steam that drifted like exhausted breath through the morning light. "Pelham's epitaph," he murmured. The last sound of his design. Lestrade, still shaken, glanced uneasily at the nearest manhole. "You don't think there's another explosion coming, Mr. Holmes?" "No," Inspector Holmes said quietly. "That was not warning, it was farewell. The city's lungs empty for the final time." Miss Edison pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "Then it's over." Holmes's gaze remained fixed upon the ground. Over for those who listen only to noise, but beneath every silence lies intention. Pelham's network will rust into legend, yet the idea that silence itself can be made to speak will not die easily. Lestrade exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Well, I'll thank Providence all the same. Another minute, and we'd have been singing our prayers in steam." Holmes gave a faint smile. "You may yet sing, Inspector, though not in tune with Pelham's orchestra." The remark puzzled him, but I understood. Holmes had long regarded London not merely as a city, but as an organism breathing, pulsing, capable of sickness and recovery. To him, Pelham's crime had been a perversion of that rhythm, and its correction a kind of surgical act. Miss Edison stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Mr. Holmes, what will become of me?" He turned to her gently. "Truth, Miss Edison, is the only sentence worth serving. You have given it freely. Whatever follows, you will find it less oppressive than silence." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "He once said I drew lines straighter than he could think of them. I suppose those lines led him here." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Genius and madness are threads of the same weave, my dear lady. You merely held the pencil while he traced his own confinement." She gave a small, broken laugh. "And you? You draw no lines." "I erased them," he said simply. Lestrade approached with his notebook. "The Yard will need her statement, of course." "And yours, Mr. Holmes, though I doubt anyone will make sense of half you've said." "Then record the other half," Holmes replied dryly. "It's usually the portion that matters." When they departed toward the waiting carriage, Holmes remained where he was, the faint clatter of hooves echoing away along Fleet Street. I lingered beside him, unwilling to break the strange hush that had descended. At length he spoke. "You see, Watson, how even the gravest danger yields to pattern. The whole affair resolved itself into 3 beats: crime, silence, confession, repeated until the city itself learned the rhythm. Every human heart beats the same pattern, though few stop to hear it." I smiled faintly. Then perhaps Pelham merely amplified his own guilt until it drowned him. Precisely, he sought absolution in engineering. He believed that by perfecting structure he could have a quiet conscience. But conscience, like sound, travels through the narrowest pipes. He drew his coat tighter as a breeze swept along the embankment. "Do you remember, Watson, when I told you that London breathes? Today it reminded me that it also listens. The echo we pursued was not merely physical, it was moral. The city always hears the steps of those who think themselves unheard." I watched him, struck once again by that curious duality in my friend, the relentless intellect joined to something almost spiritual, though he would have denied it with a smile. "And what of Miss Edison?" I asked. She seemed untethered. Holmes's expression softened. "She will recover. The burden of knowledge lightens when shared. We shall see to it she finds quieter employment, perhaps under the care of my brother's associates at the Foreign Office. They value discretion above all else." A hansom clattered by, its rhythm momentarily mimicking the old tap-tap-tap. Holmes tilted his head, a glimmer of amusement crossing his face. The world wastes no time composing its next symphony. "You think another case awaits us already?" "My dear Watson," he said, eyes alight once more, "another case always awaits. Detection, like sound, is perpetual." We turned toward Baker Street as the morning brightened. The fog had thinned into translucent veils, and the city emerged beneath it renewed, scrubbed by its own confession. Holmes walked beside me in silence until, as we neared Oxford Circus, he spoke again so softly I almost missed it. "It is curious," he said, "that Pelham's last invention was not mechanical at all. It was emotional." "How so?" "He taught London to listen." The words lingered between us like the aftertaste of music. I had no reply, and he required none. The familiar outlines of Baker Street came into view, the chemist's sign, the gleam of our windows, Mrs. Hudson's shadow moving behind the curtain. The mundane world had reclaimed us. Inside, Holmes removed his coat and set his revolver upon the table with the same care a musician gives to his instrument after a final note. "Watson," he said quietly, "make certain your account ends not with the sound, but with what follows it, the silence." He smiled. The understanding. He took up. His violin then tuned it once and drew the bow gently across the strings. 3 soft notes, tap-tap-tap, answered from the instrument, pure and unhurried. They faded into the room's stillness like breath returning to the lungs of a sleeping giant. I closed my notebook, and so ends the case of the footsteps that led nowhere. Holmes lowered the violin. No, my dear Watson, it ends precisely where it began, in the space between sound and silence. The final note shivered in the air, then dissolved. Outside, the city held its breath, as if listening for what might come next.